On October 16, 1972, a Cessna 310 took off from Anchorage Airport with 4 men on board. Among them were 2 U.S. congressmen. The flight to Juneau would take just 3.5 hours. At 9:09 a.m., the pilot made his last contact with the control tower. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. They never reached their destination. What followed was the largest aerial search in Alaskan history: 50 civilian aircraft, 40 military aircraft, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, even the legendary State Route 71 spy plane, capable of photographing a coin from over 9,000 meters high. 39 days. 32,000 square miles explored. More than 3,600 hours of searching. They found absolutely nothing. Not a fragment of metal. Not a trace of fuel. Not even a signal from the emergency transmitter that the plane was legally required to carry. 4 men. One entire plane. Vanished without a trace. Welcome to the Alaska Triangle. And this is just one story among thousands. When we hear about places where people mysteriously disappear, we probably think of the Bermuda Triangle. But there is another triangle. One much less well known. And its numbers are chilling. The Alaska Triangle is a vast region of approximately 500,000 square miles, bounded by 3 points: Juneau to the southeast, Anchorage to the south, and Barrow, now called Utqiagvik, on the Arctic north coast. Within this area, since 1988, more than 20,000 people have disappeared. Now, here's the truly disturbing part: Alaska has a population of just 730,000. That means the disappearance rate in this state is between 2 and 16 times higher than the U.S. national average, depending on the study. Alaska has the highest number of missing persons in the country. And most of those cases happen right here, in this region. Some disappear on extreme expeditions. Others on simple hikes along tourist trails. Experienced pilots vanish along with their planes. Fishing boats disappear in calm waters. And in many cases, not a single trace is ever found. Is it the brutal geography? The unforgiving climate? Or is there something more at play? Today we're going to delve into this mystery. We'll examine the cases, the theories, the evidence. And I'll let you decide what to believe. Because in the Alaska Triangle, easy answers simply don't exist. Before we talk about disappearances, you need to understand where we're talking about. Alaska is enormous. Twice the size of Texas. But while Texas has almost 30 million inhabitants, Alaska barely reaches 1 million. Most of the territory is completely uninhabited. Imagine this: mountains that rise above 6,000 meters, including Denali, the highest peak in North America. Glaciers with crevasses so deep they could swallow entire buildings. Boreal forests so dense that sunlight barely reaches the ground. Millions of lakes. Frozen rivers. Arctic tundra stretching as far as the eye can see. And the weather is deadly. Temperatures can plummet to 40 degrees below zero. Snowstorms appear out of nowhere, reducing visibility to zero in a matter of minutes. Pacific winds blow with such force that they can capsize boats. The fog is so thick that it obscures coastlines and reefs. One day can dawn with clear skies and by afternoon be in the midst of a deadly blizzard. Ice formation on the wings of small aircraft can occur in minutes, causing loss of lift and sudden drops. In Alaska, hypothermia can kill you in less than an hour if you're not prepared. And here's the most terrifying detail: when something or someone disappears in this vast territory, finding it is like searching for a specific molecule in a haystack the size of Spain. But geography and climate, however brutal they may be, do not explain everything that happens here. Let me show you something. In the United States, the average missing persons rate is approximately 6.5 people per 100,000 residents. In Alaska, that figure jumps to between 42 and 164 per 100,000, depending on the time period examined. That's not normal variation. That's a massive statistical anomaly. And when you start reviewing individual cases, the patterns become even more disturbing. Experienced pilots, with thousands of flight hours, who disappear without a single distress signal. Planes that vanish from radar as if they had never existed. Hikers who disappear from popular trails. People who vanish in cities, on cruise ships, in hotels. And in too many cases, nothing is found. No clothes. No luggage. No plane wreckage. Nothing. Ken Gerhard, a cryptozoologist and researcher who spent years studying this phenomenon, put it this way. What I found when I was investigating the Alaska Triangle was that many of these cases were legitimately unsolved. It wasn't someone attacked by a bear or falling into a crevasse, often it was people going about their daily lives. They weren't off on some grand adventure, and yet they disappeared for no good reason. People going about their daily lives. Disappearing for no good reason. That's what makes the Alaska Triangle so unsettling. Now let's go back to October 1972. To the case that defined the mystery of the Alaska Triangle. Thomas Hale Boggs Sr., 58 years old. Leader of the U.S. House of Representatives. Democrat from Louisiana. A powerful man in Washington. But Boggs wasn't just another politician. He had been a member of the Warren Commission, the group tasked with investigating the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And there was something important: Boggs had publicly expressed his disagreement with the commission's conclusions. He had also openly criticized J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director. In public. In the midst of the Cold War, when criticizing the FBI was, well, dangerous. Nicholas Joseph Begich Sr., 40 years old. First-term congressman from Alaska. Former educator and school administrator with 6 children at home. A rising politician. On October 15, Boggs arrived in Alaska specifically to support Begich's re-election campaign. They held events together in Anchorage. The pilot would be Don Johns. 38 years old. Military veteran. Chief pilot of Pan Alaska Airways with more than 17,000 flight hours. This was a man who knew Alaska like the back of his hand. Flying Magazine published an article written by Johns himself entitled "Ice Without Fear," about techniques for flying in freezing conditions. And completing the group, Russell Brown, Begich's 37-year-old assistant. 4 men. A routine flight from Anchorage to Juneau. 3.5 hours. Nothing out of the ordinary. The morning of October 16, 1972 dawned cold but clear. At 9 a.m., the twin-engine Cessna 310, registration N1812H, took off from Anchorage Airport. The planned route: fly under visual flight rules, following the coast through Tinigan Arm, cross Portage Pass, then over Prince William Sound, passing Johnstone Point and Yakutat, until finally reaching Juneau. The plane had enough fuel for 6 hours of flight. More than enough for a 3.5-hour trip. At 9:09 a.m., Don Johns made his last contact with the control tower. It was a completely routine communication. No problems. No signs of distress. That was the last anyone heard from them. At noon, the Juneau airport announced a flight delay. This was not unusual. The weather in Alaska can change rapidly. But the hours passed. 1, 2, 3. By the night of October 16, 4 men, including 2 U.S. congressmen, were officially declared missing. And then began one of the most massive search operations in the country's history. Think about the magnitude of what followed. 50 civilian aircraft. 40 military aircraft. The Coast Guard. The Navy. The Army. The Air Force. Helicopters. The Civil Air Patrol. For 39 consecutive days, these teams combed an area of more than 32,000 square miles. That's larger than the entire state of Maine. More than 3,600 hours of searching were logged. That's 150 full days in the air. And it wasn't just any search. This involved 2 members of Congress. The federal government mobilized extraordinary resources, including the State Route 71 Blackbird. For those unfamiliar with it, the State Route 71 was the most advanced spy plane in the world. It flew at more than 3 times the speed of sound at altitudes of 25,000 meters. Its cameras could photograph a coin from 9,000 meters. If something was out there, the State Route 71 would find it. He found nothing. Absolutely nothing. No metal fragments. No debris. No fuel stains in the water or snow. No signs of fire. No impact marks on the mountains. And here's what's truly disturbing: the Cessna, by federal and state law, was required to carry an emergency locator transmitter, an ELT. These devices activate automatically in the event of a crash and transmit a distress signal. The ELT never emitted a single signal. How is that possible? Even if the aircraft had completely disintegrated, the ELT should have transmitted. They are designed to survive catastrophic impacts. On November 24, 1972, after 39 days, the official search was suspended. On December 29, a judge named Dorothy Tyner signed the death certificates. The jury deliberated for 7 minutes. 4 men disappeared without a trace. This is where the story gets even stranger. In the November 1972 elections, both Boggs and Begich were re-elected posthumously. People voted for men who were probably already dead. Lindy Boggs, Hale's widow, replaced him in Congress and served for 8 additional terms. She never fully accepted his death. Nick Begich's sons pursued political careers. Mark Begich became a U.S. Senator from Alaska. Tom Begich became a state senator. The family kept his memory alive. But there is one detail that makes all of this even more disturbing. In March 1974, just 17 months after the disappearance, Peg Begich, Nick's widow, married a man named Jerry Max Paisley. Who was Jerry Paisley? A criminal. A hitman with connections to the Bonanno crime family, one of the 5 mafia families in New York. The marriage lasted only 2 years. And 2 decades later, in 1994, while in prison in Arizona for murder, Paisley would make a confession that would change everything. In 1994, Jerry Paisley called Alaskan investigators from his cell in Arizona. He told them an extraordinary story. According to Paisley, in the summer of 1972, months before the disappearance, he and another mafia associate escorted Peg Begich from Tucson Airport to the Spanish Trail Motel. They then took her to the Kon-Tiki restaurant for a private meeting with Joe Bonanno, the legendary mafia boss. Months later, according to Paisley, a lieutenant under Bonanno handed him a sealed briefcase with specific instructions: take it to Anchorage. No questions asked. Paisley says he handed that briefcase over to 2 men in Anchorage. They told him that something big was about to happen. Years later, he was told that the briefcase contained a high-tech bomb used to destroy Boggs and Begich's plane. Now, here's the tricky part. Even Paisley himself admitted there were inconsistencies in his story. The 3 investigators who interviewed him said there was, at least a possibility he's telling the truth. At least one possibility. Not exactly a definitive confirmation. But it raises questions. Why did Peg marry this man just 17 months later? What happened at that meeting at the Kon-Tiki? Was there really a bomb? And if there was sabotage, who was the real target? Boggs or Begich? Jonathan Walczak, an investigative journalist, spent nearly a decade investigating this case. From 2011 to 2020, he reviewed FBI documents, interviewed original investigators, and examined Boggs's personal papers at Tulane University. His conclusion, presented on his podcast Missing in Alaska: if there was sabotage, Begich was probably the target, not Boggs. Why? Begich was a local politician in a state where oil, land, and power were worth fortunes. Alaska had just discovered enormous oil reserves. There were massive interests at stake. But others think differently. Boggs was a member of the Warren Commission. He had expressed doubts about Kennedy's assassination. He had publicly criticized the FBI. In the midst of the Cold War, with real conspiracies unfolding in Washington, Boggs was a dangerous man to someone. Or perhaps it wasn't sabotage at all. The official explanation, the one most experts support, is much simpler. The weather that day was marginal. Not terrible, but not ideal either. Portage Pass, which the plane had to cross, is known to be particularly dangerous. The theory: the plane encountered ice formation as it passed through the mountain pass. The ice accumulated on the wings and control surfaces. The plane lost lift. It crashed into Prince William Sound, a deep, cold body of water. The impact would have sunk the wreckage immediately. The icy water, the currents, and time would have scattered or buried any evidence. It's a rational explanation. Based on facts. Supported by data. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why the ELT never transmitted. It doesn't explain how an aircraft completely disappears during one of the most intensive searches in history. It doesn't explain the total radio silence, without a single word of distress. And here's the problem with the Alaska Triangle: even rational explanations have holes. And it's not just Boggs and Begich. In 1950, a military plane with 44 people on board disappeared without a trace. 44 people. In 2013, Alan Foster, a pilot with nearly 10,000 flight hours, disappeared from radar shortly after takeoff. He crashed at an altitude of 1,100 feet without giving any indication of trouble. Neither he nor his aircraft were ever found. In 1990, a Cessna 340 with 4 passengers vanished. Massive search. Nothing. Richard Griffiths, an inventor, wanted to demonstrate his special survival sleeping bag. He took a bus to the White River. He was never seen again. Thomas Nutze, a nurse, was seen on security video buying cigarettes at a gas station. 12 hours later, he disappeared. His Jeep was found 12 miles outside of Anchorage. He was never found. Case after case after case. And in most cases, absolutely nothing can be found. Okay, let's talk about theories. Let's start with rational, science-based explanations. Theory 1, Extreme Geography. Alaska is, objectively, one of the most hostile places on the planet. Consider the scale: 500,000 square miles of territory, most of it completely uninhabited. There are glaciers with internal crevasses the size of buildings. Hidden ice caves that could swallow an entire airplane. Millions of lakes. Forests where sunlight barely penetrates. There is a historical precedent. In 1947, a Lancaster bomber called Stardust disappeared while flying from Buenos Aires to Santiago. When was it found? 51 years later, in 1998. Argentine climbers discovered the wreckage on Mount Tupungata. What happened? The plane crashed into a vertical glacier. The avalanche it triggered buried it in minutes. Ice and snow concealed it for half a century. If that can happen in the Andes, it can happen in Alaska. But on a much larger scale, because Alaska is much bigger. Theory 2, Killer Climate. The climate in Alaska isn't just difficult. It's deadly. Storms appear out of nowhere. Whiteouts reduce visibility to 0 in seconds. Ice formation on small aircraft can occur in minutes, without warning. Pilots can lose all visual reference points. Up is down. Spatial disorientation kills even the most experienced. And on land, hypothermia is silent and rapid. You can be conscious one moment and dead within an hour. Theory 3, Wildlife. Alaska has some of the largest predators in North America: grizzly bears that can weigh over 400 kilos, polar bears in the north, and wolves in packs. Gary Southerton traveled to Alaska to hunt in 1975. He disappeared. His family held out hope for decades. In 1997, a hunter found a human skull. In 2022, DNA confirmed it was Southerton. Official conclusion: attacked by a bear. This is a solved case. A natural explanation. And many other unsolved cases probably have the same explanation. Theory 4, Real magnetic anomalies. This is where things get interesting. Alaska has massive concentrations of minerals: gold, copper, zinc, and silver. These deposits create localized magnetic fields that can interfere with compasses and navigation systems. This is verifiable science. Geologists have documented it. It's a real phenomenon called magnetic declination. In Alaska, compasses can deviate by up to 30 degrees from the correct reading. 30 degrees can send you completely off course. Pilots relying on instruments, especially before modern GPS, could have navigated in the completely wrong direction without realizing it. And when trying to correct with an incorrect compass, the error is magnified. That explains some plane crashes. Perhaps many. But it doesn't explain everything. Now let's enter more speculative territory. HAARP, the conspiracy theory. In Gakona, Alaska, within the Triangle, there is a facility called HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It is a field of 180 high-frequency transmitting antennas. It was built in the 1990s by the Air Force, the Navy, and DARPA. Its official purpose: to study the ionosphere to improve communications and surveillance technology. In 2015, it was transferred to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Today it is a civilian research facility. But conspiracy theories abound. Some believe HAARP is an electromagnetic weapon capable of shooting down airplanes. Others say it can control the weather, create earthquakes, and even manipulate human minds. The theory, disappearances, increased from the 1990s, when HAARP was under construction. Here's the problem: disappearances in Alaska have been documented long before HAARP. The cases from the 1950s and 1970s cannot be explained by a facility that didn't exist. Furthermore, HAARP's power is minuscule compared to natural phenomena like the aurora borealis. And multiple independent studies have confirmed that it cannot control the weather or shoot down airplanes. HAARP is real. But it's probably not responsible. The energy vortex theory. Some researchers believe that Alaska contains an energy vortex, similar to theories about Stonehenge or the pyramids of Egypt. The idea: there are points on Earth where power lines intersect, creating electromagnetic anomalies that cause disorientation, equipment malfunction, and even hallucinations. Rescue teams in Alaska have reported hearing strange sounds, like a swarm of angry bees. Pilots describe instruments malfunctioning for no apparent reason. Is this evidence of a vortex? Or are these effects of the natural magnetic anomalies we already mentioned? The line between science and speculation is blurring. Paranormal theories. And then there are the theories that completely challenge our understanding of reality. Alien abduction. Alaska has a long history of UFO sightings. Lights in the sky that don't correspond to aircraft. Unexplained formations. Testimonies from military and civilian pilots. The theory: extraterrestrial beings are abducting humans for experiments. Why Alaska specifically, no one knows. Perhaps because of its isolation. Perhaps because of something in its geology. There is no physical evidence of extraterrestrial spacecraft. The sightings can be explained as atmospheric phenomena, satellites, or military aircraft. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Dimensional portals. This is probably the most extreme theory, that there is a portal or window to another dimension within the Alaska Triangle. People don't die. They are transported to another reality. It's a fascinating theory for science fiction. But it has no scientific basis whatsoever. The laws of physics as we know them do not allow such phenomena on a macroscopic scale. The underground Black Pyramid. And then there's this one, that there's a giant pyramid, bigger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, buried under Alaska. It was supposedly discovered during the Cold War. Anonymous military personnel have reported it. It emits electromagnetic energy that causes disappearances. The problem: there isn't a single photograph. Not an official document. Nor seismic studies to confirm it. All the witnesses are anonymous. Such a massive structure would have been detected by satellites, geological studies, and oil drilling. This theory is, almost certainly, fiction. Native legends. But there is another perspective that deserves to be heard. One that existed long before paranormal investigators or scientists arrived. The native peoples of Alaska, the Tlingit, the Inupiat, the Yupik, the Athabaskan, have lived on this land for thousands of years. And they have their own explanations. For them, the land is not just geography. It is a living being. With its own will. With sacred places that must not be disturbed. With spirits that must be respected. They speak of the kushtaka, a shape-shifting creature that can appear as an otter or as a human. According to Tlingit tradition, the kushtaka mimics the voices of loved ones to lure travelers into the water, where they drown. Is it a real creature? Or is it a way to teach respect for water and warn about its dangers? Traditional legends often contain practical truths wrapped in stories. And here's what we can't ignore: Alaska Native communities are disproportionately affected by disappearances. 29% of missing persons in Alaska are Native, even though they make up only 22% of the population. Indigenous women and girls are disappearing at alarming rates. And for far too long, these cases have received less attention, fewer resources, and less media coverage than others. Any discussion about the Alaska Triangle must acknowledge this. Not just as a statistic, but as an ongoing human tragedy. So, after reviewing all the theories, all the evidence, where does this leave us? There are facts that simply don't fit perfectly into any explanation. Let's return to the case of Boggs and Begich. The emergency locator transmitter was required by law to be on that aircraft. These devices activate automatically upon impact. They are designed to survive catastrophic crashes, fire, and water. It never emitted a signal. Did they forget to install it? It's possible, but it would be a serious violation of federal and state regulations. Did it fail at the exact moment of impact? Unlikely, but possible. Was it intentionally sabotaged? Impossible to prove. But without that signal, finding the plane in 500,000 square miles of hostile territory is virtually impossible. Another disturbing pattern: in many cases of missing planes, there is no emergency communication. Everything is normal. And suddenly, silence. Don Johns was an expert pilot with 17,000 flight hours. If he had experienced problems, ice on the wings, engine failure, extreme weather, he would have had time to communicate something. Even if it was just, "We have a problem." Nothing. Alan Foster in 2013, he fell 1,100 feet without saying a word. The 1950 military plane with 44 people disappeared from radar, total silence. What event could be so sudden, so catastrophic, that it doesn't allow even a second to press a radio button? And then there's the biggest problem of all. In most air disasters, wreckage is eventually found. Metal fragments. Fuel stains. Burn marks. Something. Air France Flight 447 crashed into the deep Atlantic in 2009. Floating debris was found within days. The black box was recovered 2 years later. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared over the Indian Ocean. Fragments of its wing were found on African shores years later. Boggs and Begich's Cessna 310 was searched for 39 days with massive military resources, including the world's most advanced spy plane. They found nothing. As? Glaciers can hide things, yes. But even the star dust was eventually found. And that plane crashed in 1947, before satellite technology, before GPS, before modern coordinated searches. Alaska has been extensively mapped using satellites, LiDAR, and geological surveys. If there's a Cessna 310 buried somewhere, it should eventually turn up. But he hasn't appeared. And then there's the point Ken Gerhard emphasized: not all disappearances occur in remote wilderness. Thomas Nutze disappeared after being seen on security video at a gas station. His Jeep was found 12 miles outside of Anchorage. He was never seen again. People disappear on tourist cruises. On crowded mountaintops with hundreds of witnesses. In urban areas of Juneau and Anchorage. How does someone vanish on a crowded cruise ship? Harsh geography doesn't explain those cases. Neither does the climate. Bears definitely don't. Something else is happening. But what exactly, we don't know. So, what's the truth about the Alaska Triangle? The honest answer is, there probably isn't one truth. Some cases have clear natural explanations. Gary Southerton was attacked by a bear. That was confirmed by DNA decades later. Probably dozens, perhaps hundreds more cases have similar explanations: hypothermia, falls, avalanches, drowning. Alaska is objectively one of the most dangerous places on the planet. The geography is brutal. The climate is lethal. The wildlife is dangerous. And the territory is so vast that finding remains is extraordinarily difficult. All of that is true. But it's also true that Alaska has a statistically anomalous disappearance rate. 2 to 16 times higher than the national average, depending on the study. That's not normal. That can't be explained by geography alone. It is true that there are documented magnetic anomalies that can interfere with navigation. That is verifiable science. It is true that some cases defy easy explanations. The Boggs-Begich case, after 53 years, remains unsolved. 4 men and an airplane vanished without a single piece of physical evidence. It's true that consistent pilot testimonies report instruments failing for no apparent reason. Compasses spinning. GPS losing signal. Inexplicable feelings that something is wrong. Does that mean there are paranormal forces at play? Extraterrestrials? Dimensional portals? I have no evidence of that. And intellectual honesty requires me to admit, extraordinary explanations require extraordinary evidence. But it also requires me to admit this: I don't have all the answers. And perhaps that's what makes the Alaska Triangle so fascinating. In an era where we seem to be able to explain everything, where we have satellites that can read license plates from space, where we have technology that can track your phone down to the exact meter, there are still places where people simply disappear. And we don't know why. But behind every statistic, there is a real person. A real family waiting for answers. Lindy Boggs lived 36 more years without knowing what happened to her husband. She died in 2013 without answers. Nick Begich's children grew up without their father. They built political careers honoring his memory, but they never knew what really happened. Dozens of families keep cases open for decades. Some never lose hope that their loved one is alive, somewhere. And for Alaska Native communities, the problem continues today. Women and girls disappear. Searches are less intensive. Media coverage is less. Justice is slower. That's not a paranormal mystery. That's human injustice. And it deserves just as much attention as any theory about energy vortices. So I'll leave you with this. Alaska is real. The disappearances are real. The statistics are verifiable. Is it entirely explainable by geography, climate, and human error? Perhaps. Are there factors we don't yet fully understand? Possibly. Should we continue searching for answers? Absolutely. Because every unsolved case is a person who deserves to be found. A family that deserves closure. A story that deserves to be told. The Alaska Triangle reminds us of something fundamental: despite all our technology, all our knowledge, all our confidence, nature still holds secrets. And some of those secrets, we may never discover. If this case has fascinated you as much as it has me, let me know in the comments. What theory do you think is the most plausible? Natural explanations? Electromagnetic anomalies? Something beyond our current understanding? And if you know of other missing persons cases in Alaska or have information about any of the cases we mentioned, please contact the Alaska State Troopers. Many of these cases remain open. Families are still searching for answers. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more cases like this. We explore the world's most fascinating mysteries, always with respect for the people involved and a commitment to verifiable facts. In the next video, we might explore another unsolved case. Do you have any suggestions? Leave them in the comments. Thank you for joining me on this trip to the Alaska Triangle. And remember, if you ever visit Alaska, respect the land. Prepare properly. Let someone know where you're going. Because in the Alaska Triangle, the line between adventure and disappearance, she's thinner than you think. See you in the next video.